Mike Sullivan woke to the familiar weight of Max settling against his legs. The retired canine German Shepherd had developed a sixth sense for his nightmares, always appearing moments before Mike jerked awake, drenched in sweat and heart racing. Tonight was no different. The images of the warehouse raid still haunted him. Flashing lights, shouting, gunfire, and then darkness. "I'm okay, boy," Mike whispered, reaching down to scratch behind Max's ears. The dog's eyes, though clouded with age, studied him with the same intensity they had during their 8 years together on the force. Max had been retired early after taking a bullet meant for Mike, the injury leaving him with a permanent limp. 6 months later, when Mike's own career ended with a back injury, it seemed only right they'd retreat into civilian life together. Outside, the small town of Pinecrest was just stirring to life. Their modest house sat on the edge of town, backing up to the sprawling Redwood State Park. The early morning silence was broken only by distant birdsong and the occasional car passing on the main road. Mike glanced at the clock. 5:17 a.m. Old habits died hard. Neither of them had adjusted to civilian sleep schedules, even 3 years into retirement. "Might as well start the day," Mike muttered, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His back protested with a sharp twinge that radiated down his left leg. Max was already at the bedroom door, looking back expectantly, his tail wagging with subdued enthusiasm. The shepherd moved with the careful dignity of an aging officer, his own injury evident in the slight drag of his back right leg. Their morning routine was well established: coffee for Mike, fresh water for Max, and a slow walk through the quiet neighborhood streets before the rest of the world fully woke. It was during these walks that Mike felt most at peace, the weight of his memories temporarily lifted by the simple rhythm of movement and Max's steady presence beside him. Today, they took their usual route past the elementary school, the local diner, and finally toward the small park that bordered the forest. The fog hung low, wrapping the trees in a ghostly embrace and muffling the sounds of the waking town. Mike sipped his coffee from a travel mug, his free hand occasionally reaching down to brush against Max's head, a gesture of reassurance for them both. "Sullivan, hold up!" The voice broke through the morning quiet, causing both Mike and Max to turn in unison. Sheriff Tom Carter jogged toward them, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. In a town as small as Pinecrest, the sheriff wore many. "Tom," Mike acknowledged with a nod. Max sat at attention, his training still evident in the alert posture and attentive eyes. "You're out early?" "Just finished the night shift," Tom replied, slightly out of breath. "Saw you two and thought I'd catch you before you disappeared into your hermit cave for the day." Mike smiled thinly. His reputation as the town recluse wasn't entirely unearned. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Tom glanced down at Max, then back to Mike. "We'd had some unusual activity at the old Brenner warehouse on the edge of town. Nothing concrete, just some reports of lights and vehicles at odd hours. Probably nothing, but your deputy is on vacation and you're stretched thin," Mike finished for him. "What are you asking, Tom?" The sheriff shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Just thought you might keep an eye out during your walks. That warehouse backs up to the trail you and Max usually take. If you notice anything unusual, give me a call." He handed Mike a business card. "My cell's on there, day or night." Mike took the card, turning it over in his fingers. "I'm not a cop anymore, Tom, and neither is Max." "I know," Tom said quietly. "But you both still have the instincts, and sometimes that's all we need." He nodded to them both and turned to leave. Enjoy your walk, Sullivan. Morning, Max. Max watched the sheriff walk away, his ears perked forward in attention. Something in the dog's posture made Mike uneasy. After 8 years as partners, he'd learned to trust Max's instincts above all else. What do you think, boy? Should we take a detour today? The Brenner warehouse had once been the economic center of Pinecrest, shipping timber from the surrounding forests across the state. But like many rural industries, it had fallen victim to changing times, standing abandoned for nearly a decade. As Mike and Max approached the building, the morning fog still clung to its weathered walls, giving it a ghostly appearance. Mike had no official reason to investigate, but curiosity, or perhaps old habits, pulled him toward the building. Max walked slightly ahead, his nose working the air, body language alert, but not alarmed. They circled the perimeter, staying within the tree line to avoid being seen. Nothing seemed immediately suspicious. The chain-link fence was intact, padlocks secured the main gates, and the building itself showed no signs of recent entry. Mike was about to turn back when Max suddenly froze, his entire body rigid, nose pointed toward the far side of the building. "What is it, boy?" Mike whispered, instantly alert. Silently, Mike gave the hand signal for Max to lead, keeping low as they moved through the underbrush. Max led him to a small service door, partially hidden by overgrown bushes. Unlike the main entrances, this door showed subtle signs of recent use. The padlock appeared new, and the surrounding foliage was slightly disturbed. Mike crouched beside Max, examining the ground. Fresh tire tracks cut through the mud nearby, too narrow for delivery trucks, but perfect for ATVs or dirt bikes. Next to the door, barely visible in the dirt, lay a single shell casing. Mike picked it up, rolling it between his fingers. 9mm, recently fired. His heart rate quickened as memories of the warehouse raid flashed through his mind. Max pressed against his leg, a grounding presence that pulled him back to the present. That's when they heard it. The distant rumble of engines approaching from the forest side of the property. Max's ears perked up and his body tensed. "Time to go, boy," Mike whispered, pocketing the shell casing and retreating into the tree line. Whatever was happening at the Brenner warehouse, they had just become witnesses. And in Mike's experience, witnesses often became targets. Mike and Max retreated through the forest, staying off the main trails. The morning fog provided cover, but Mike didn't slow their pace until they were well away from the warehouse. His mind raced, analyzing what they'd witnessed. Fresh tire tracks, a new padlock on a hidden door, and a spent shell casing. All signs of recent, possibly illegal activity. "What do you think we stumbled into, Max?" Mike whispered, crouching next to his partner. Max's ears remained alert, his gaze repeatedly turning back toward the direction of the warehouse. The shepherd's body language conveyed what Mike already felt. Something wasn't right back there. Mike pulled out his phone, Sheriff Carter's business card in hand. His finger hovered over the number, then paused. What exactly would he report? That he trespassed on private property because his dog seemed interested? That he'd found a single shell casing that could have been there for weeks? "Let's gather more information first," he decided, pocketing his phone. The instincts that had made him a top K-9 officer hadn't faded with retirement. Something about this situation felt bigger than trespassers or teenagers using the old building as a hangout. Mike and Max continued their walk, taking a circuitous route home that allowed them to observe the town from elevated viewpoints. Pinecrest was small enough that newcomers stood out, and Mike had developed the habit of noting unfamiliar vehicles since moving here. Today, he spotted two, a black SUV with tinted windows parked outside the town's only motel, and a silver pickup truck at the gas station that he hadn't seen before. Back home, Mike hung his jacket by the door and filled Max's water bowl. Then he retrieved the shell casing from his pocket, examining it under the bright light of his kitchen. It was definitely 9mm, and the lack of weathering suggested it had been fired recently, possibly within the last 48 hours. He reached for his laptop, hesitating only briefly before logging into the retired officer's portal. His credentials still granted him limited access to certain databases. Not enough for official investigations, but sufficient for preliminary research. He searched for recent reports in Pinecrest and surrounding areas. 3 cargo thefts reported in neighboring counties, he muttered, scrolling through the brief summaries. Electronics, pharmaceuticals, all from shipping trucks on rural routes. Max watched him from his bed in the corner, head tilted slightly, as if following the investigation. Mike's phone rang, startling him. The caller ID showed Tom Carter's name. "Sheriff," Mike answered, keeping his tone neutral. "Sullivan, you and Max enjoy your walk this morning?" Tom's voice was casual, but there was an edge to it that Mike recognized immediately. "We did," Mike replied carefully. "Took the forest trail, nice and quiet." But pause. Funny thing, I got a call from Bill Turner, who owns that land adjacent to the Brenner property. Says he spotted someone with a dog near the warehouse this morning. Mike's jaw tightened. Lots of people walk their dogs in that area. Not many former K-9 officers with German Shepherds, Tom countered. "Look, Mike, I asked you to keep an eye out, not go playing detective. If you saw something, I need to know now, officially." Mike weighed his options. He wasn't ready to share his suspicions without more concrete evidence. But he also couldn't lie to the sheriff. "I walked the perimeter," he admitted. "Didn't see anyone, but there are fresh tire tracks on the north side. Could be ATVs or dirt bikes. And the service door has a new padlock." "That's it?" Tom pressed. Mike's hand closed around the shell casing in his pocket. "That's it." After hanging up, Mike sat at his kitchen table, the shell casing rolling between his fingers. Max approached, resting his muzzle on Mike's knee, eyes questioning. "I don't trust him," Mike admitted quietly, scratching behind Max's ears. Something's off about this whole situation. That evening, Mike drove into town for dinner at the local diner, a rare deviation from his usual routine. Max sat in the passenger seat, dignified and alert. The diner was a hub of local gossip, and tonight, Mike wanted to listen. Liz, the owner, greeted them warmly. "Mike and Max, twice in 1 month. I'm honored." She led them to a corner booth with good sight lines to the rest of the restaurant. "The usual?" Mike nodded, settling in, as Max curled under the table. The diner was busier than usual for a weeknight. At the counter, he recognized Ben Harris, who worked at the town's hardware store, deep in conversation with a stranger. A tall man in his 40s, with close-cropped hair and the rigid posture that screamed military or law enforcement. Mike nodded, settling in as Max curled under the table. The diner was busier than usual for a weeknight. At the counter, he recognized Ben Harris, who worked at the town's hardware store, deep in conversation with a stranger. A tall man in his 40s, with close-cropped hair and the rigid posture that screamed military or law enforcement. Mike kept his attention divided between his meal and the conversations around him. Snippets drifted his way. complaints about logging restrictions, gossip about newcomers to town, and significantly, talk of unusual traffic on the back roads. "I'm telling you," an older man at a nearby table insisted. "3 big trucks came through last night. No markings, no nothing. Middle of the night on County Road 17. That ain't normal." "Probably just logging trucks, Earl," his companion dismissed. "They run at odd hours sometimes. Not on that road, they don't. It's restricted." Mike's attention sharpened. County Road 17 ran past the Brenner warehouse, connecting to the interstate, 20 miles south. He filed away the information, continuing to eat as if unbothered. The stranger at the counter paid his bill and turned to leave. As he passed Mike's table, Max shifted suddenly, low rumble building in his throat. It wasn't a growl, exactly, but a clear sign of alertness. The stranger paused, his gaze falling to Max, then rising to meet Mike's. For a brief moment, recognition flickered in the man's eyes, not of Mike personally, but of what he was. It was the instant recognition that law enforcement officers often shared, a silent acknowledgement of a shared profession. "Nice dog," the man said, his voice neutral. "Belgian Malinois?" "German Shepherd," Mike corrected, keeping his tone casual, while noting the deliberate misidentification. Any professional would know the difference immediately. "Retired canine." The man nodded once. "Best partners there are." Then he was gone, the bell over the door jingling as he exited. Liz appeared with coffee refill. "I see you've met our newest visitor. Been asking all sorts of questions about the town, the forest roads, local businesses." "Seems friendly enough," Mike said, watching through the window as the man climbed into the black SUV he'd spotted earlier. "Did he mention why he's in town?" "Said he's scouting locations for a hunting lodge investment," Liz shrugged. "Didn't strike me as the outdoorsy type, though." Mike finished his meal in thoughtful silence. Later, driving home with Max, he took a detour that led past the motel. The black SUV was parked outside room 8, alongside the silver pickup he'd seen at the gas station. 2 vehicles, at least 2 people involved. "I think we need another walk tomorrow morning, boy," Mike said quietly. Very thoroughly, Max's tail thumped once against the seat. All the answer Mike needed. The darkness before dawn hung heavy over Pinecrest as Mike and Max set out, guided only by the thin beam of a penlight. Mike had traded his usual morning routine for stealth, dressing in dark clothing and moving with the practiced silence of his canine unit days. Max kept pace beside him, the shepherd's training evident in his focused demeanor. They approached the motel from the rear, using the cover of thick shrubbery that bordered the property. The black SUV and silver pickup remained parked outside room 8, undisturbed since the previous evening. A dim light flickered behind closed curtains. Someone was awake despite the early hour. "Easy, Max," Mike whispered, giving the hand signal for caution. They found a position with clear sight lines to both vehicles and the motel room door, concealed within the tree line. The wait wasn't long. At 4:47 a.m., the motel door opened, and 3 men emerged. The first was the stranger from the diner. The second, shorter and stockier, carried what looked like a duffel bag. The third moved with the cautious precision of someone scanning for threats. They spoke in hushed tones, their breath forming clouds in the crisp morning air. Mike strained to hear their conversation, catching only fragments. The last shipment tonight, and warehouse secure until... The men climbed into their respective vehicles, 2 in the SUV, 1 in the pickup, and pulled out of the parking lot with headlights dimmed. "Let's follow, Max," Mike murmured, retreating through the trees toward where he'd parked his own truck several blocks away. By the time they were mobile, the targets had a head start, but Mike had a strong suspicion about their destination. The road to the Brenner warehouse was deserted, winding through dense forest before opening into the clearing where the abandoned building stood. Mike killed his engine and lights a quarter-mile away, continuing on foot with Max leading the way. Dawn was just breaking, casting long shadows across the landscape and providing ideal conditions for surveillance. This time, the warehouse showed clear signs of activity. The main gates stood open, the padlock cut. The black SUV was parked beside the building, but the silver pickup was nowhere in sight. Mike and Max circled wide, using the tree line for cover as they approached from the rear of the property. The service door they'd discovered the previous day was now propped open with a cinder block. Voices echoed from inside, accompanied by the sound of heavy objects being moved. Mike crouched beside a stack of old pallets, close enough to observe, but maintaining cover. "Get that area cleared," a commanding voice ordered from inside. The stranger from the diner. "Trucks arrive at midnight. I want everything ready for immediate transfer. No delays, no mistakes." Max suddenly stiffened beside Mike, his head turning sharply toward the far side of the warehouse. A moment later, Mike heard it too, the crunch of tires on gravel. The silver pickup had returned, moving slowly around the perimeter of the property in what appeared to be a security sweep. Mike signaled Max to stay low as they pressed tighter against their cover. The pickup passed within 15 feet of their position, its driver scanning the tree line with methodical precision. For a heart-stopping moment, the vehicle paused directly opposite their hiding spot, the driver's gaze seeming to fix on their location. Max remained perfectly still, his training overriding any impulse to react. Mike held his breath, hand resting reassuringly on the shepherd's back. "After what felt like an eater, time to go," Mike whispered, recognizing they'd pushed their luck far enough. They retreated the way they'd come, moving carefully through the trees until they reached Mike's truck. Only when they were a safe distance away did Mike finally relax his grip on the steering wheel. "Good boy," he said, reaching over to scratch Max behind the ears. "You did great back there." The shepherd's tail thumped against the seat, though his eyes remained alert, watching the road behind them through the rear window. Mike drove directly to Sheriff Carter's office, his decision made. Whatever was happening at the warehouse was clearly illegal, and tonight's shipment needed to be intercepted. Personal suspicions aside, this required official law enforcement. The sheriff's station was quiet when they arrived. Only Deputy Garcia at the front desk, looking surprised to see Mike and Max so early. "Sullivan," she greeted him. "Sheriff's not in yet. Something I can help you with?" "I need to speak with him," Mike said, noting the empty gun rack behind her. Unusual, since the sheriff's shotgun was typically stored there when he wasn't on patrol. "It's about the Brenner warehouse. When do you expect him in?" Deputy Garcia checked her watch. "He's actually out at the warehouse now. Called in about 20 minutes ago. said he was responding to reports of trespassing on the property. Mike felt his blood run cold. Who reported the trespassing? Didn't say. She shrugged. Just that he was checking it out personally. Should be back soon, if you want to wait. Max pressed against Mike's leg, sensing his sudden tension. The timing was too perfect. The coincidence too convenient. Either someone at the warehouse had spotted them and called the sheriff, or... "Thanks," Mike said, backing toward the door. "I'll catch him later." Outside, Mike leaned against his truck, mind racing. If Sheriff Carter was at the warehouse now, talking to the men Mike had been observing, it could mean one of two things. Either the sheriff was legitimately investigating, or he was involved. The missing shotgun suggested he expected trouble, or was prepared to cause it. "What do you think, Max?" Mike asked, more to organize his thoughts than expecting an answer. "Is Carter clean?" Max's ears perked up. His attention focused down the street. A moment later, the sheriff's cruiser appeared, turning into the station parking lot. Mike straightened, watching as Tom Carter stepped out of the vehicle. The sheriff's expression darkened when he spotted Mike. "Sullivan," he called, approaching with measured steps. "Funny running into you here. I was just out at the Brenner property again." "Find anything interesting?" Mike asked carefully. "As a matter of fact, yes." Tom's hand rested casually on his holster, a subtle gesture that didn't escape Mike's notice. "Security reported someone prowling around early this morning. Wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Mike maintained eye contact, keeping his expression neutral. "Security? For an abandoned warehouse?" "Not abandoned anymore," Tom replied. "Property's been leased to a private company. Timber processing equipment being installed, all perfectly legitimate." The lie was smooth, practiced. Mike had seen enough to know the warehouse wasn't being prepared for timber processing, and the sheriff's casual dismissal confirmed his growing suspicion. "I see," Mike said. "Well, good to know it's being put to use again." Tom studied him for a long moment. "Stay away from the warehouse, Mike. For your own good." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. Mike drove aimlessly after leaving the sheriff's station, his mind churning with suspicion and uncertainty. Max sat alert in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at his partner, as if sensing the conflict within him. The warning from Sheriff Carter echoed in Mike's thoughts. Not just the words, but the subtle threat behind them. "We're on our own now, boy," Mike finally said, turning onto the highway that led out of Pinecrest. Max's ears perked up, his eyes questioning. "We need backup, but not from around here." 20 miles outside of town, Mike pulled into a roadside diner and parked at the far end of the lot. He retrieved his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in nearly 2 years. "Agent Ramirez," a crisp voice answered on the third ring. "Elena, it's Mike Sullivan." A pause. "Sullivan, been a while. Heard you retired to some backwater town after the incident." "I did," Mike confirmed, watching the road through his rearview mirror. "Listen, I need your expertise on something that might fall under FBI jurisdiction. Cargo thefts, possibly interstate trafficking, using a warehouse in Pinecrest as a distribution point." "Why not go to local authorities?" Elena asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Local sheriff might be involved," Mike said, lowering his voice despite being alone in his truck. "I've witnessed suspicious activity, people claiming to be setting up timber processing in an abandoned warehouse, but their behavior suggests something else entirely." "And you're calling me instead of regional police because?" Because I trust you, Mike said simply. And because you always said you owed me one after Sacramento. Elena's sigh was audible. I can't officially open an investigation based on a hunch, Mike. Even from a decorated former officer. I have evidence, Mike insisted. Shell casing from the site. Observed activity consistent with trafficking operations. And something big is happening tonight. Trucks arriving at midnight for what they called an immediate transfer. Another pause, longer this time. Text me your exact location. I'll see what I can do. But Sullivan, officially, this conversation never happened. Mike thanked her and hung up, relief washing over him. Elena Ramirez was one of the good ones, tough, thorough, and uncompromising when it came to justice. If anyone would take his concerns seriously without requiring official channels, it was her. Now we wait, Mike told Max, who had settled with his head on Mike's lap, eyes still vigilant. But not here. We need somewhere safe to lay low until tonight. They drove another 30 miles to a small lakeside cabin that belonged to Dave Mercer, a former canine officer who'd trained with Mike years ago. Dave had always told Mike the place was available if he ever needed it, and today was definitely that day. The cabin was simple, but well-maintained, situated on a private acre of lakefront property. Dave used it primarily for fishing trips, but kept it stocked with necessities year-round. Mike found the spare key exactly where Dave had described, in a fake rock by the back porch. Once inside, Mike secured the perimeter, drawing curtains and checking sight lines from each window. Max explored the cabin methodically, his nose working every corner before settling by the front door, his preferred surveillance position. Good choice, buddy, Mike approved, unpacking the small go bag he kept in his truck. Another habit from his service days that had never faded. The bag contained essentials: first aid kit, flashlight, spare ammunition for the Glock he carried, legally with his retired officer permit, and a few protein bars. Mike's phone vibrated with an incoming text from Elena. Check those shipment thefts. Pattern matches larger operation we've been tracking. Sending Agent Kyle Dawson, former Marine, trustworthy. ETA 3 p.m. Recon only. No engagement until backup arrives. Mike checked his watch. Just past 10 a.m. 5 hours to prepare and brief Dawson on what they'd observed. It wasn't a full FBI response team, but it was something. Elena was putting her neck out, even sending one agent based solely on Mike's word. At precisely 3 p.m., a dark blue sedan pulled up outside the cabin. Max was on his feet instantly, a low rumble building in his chest. Easy, Mike commanded softly, watching through the window as a tall, broad-shouldered man in plain clothes exited the vehicle. He moved with the unmistakable precision of someone with tactical training, his eyes scanning the property as he approached. Mike opened the door before Dawson could knock, Max at his side. "Sullivan?" the agent asked, showing his credentials. "Kyle Dawson. Ramirez sent me." Mike invited him inside, watching as Dawson acknowledged Max with the respect of someone who understood working dogs. "Former canine?" Dawson asked, allowing Max to sniff his hand before entering. "Best partner I ever had," Mike confirmed. "Still is." They settled at the kitchen table, where Mike had laid out everything he knew. His hand-drawn map of the warehouse, notes on the vehicles and individuals he'd observed, and the shell casing in a small evidence bag. "Ramirez filled me in on the basics," Dawson said, reviewing Mike's materials with practiced efficiency. What makes you think the sheriff is involved? Mike recounted his interactions with Carter, from the initial request to check out the warehouse to the warning to stay away. He's either on their payroll or being coerced, Mike concluded. Either way, we can't trust local law enforcement on this. Dawson nodded, his expression grim. Based on what Ramirez told me, this fits the pattern of a sophisticated interstate trafficking operation we've been tracking for months. They move stolen goods through rural areas, using abandoned properties as temporary storage and distribution points. Any idea what they're moving? Mike asked. Varied cargo, electronics, pharmaceuticals, sometimes weapons. Whatever has high value and low traceability. The operation's been linked to at least 3 different criminal organizations on the West Coast. Mike processed this information, the scope of what they were dealing with becoming clearer. So what's the plan for tonight? Surveillance only, Dawson emphasized. I've requested backup, but the nearest tactical team is in Sacramento, 4 hours away at best. They're on standby, but need confirmation before deploying. And if we get that confirmation, then we move in with full federal authority, Dawson said. But until then, we observe and document. No engagement. As dusk approached, they prepared for the night's operation. Dawson provided Mike with a small digital camera with night vision capability and an encrypted radio. I know you're not officially involved, Dawson said, his tone professional but understanding. But Ramirez vouches for you, and frankly, your knowledge of the area is invaluable. Mike checked his watch. 7:30 p.m. We should move out soon. Position ourselves before dark. Get eyes on the warehouse well before the midnight delivery. Max stood at attention, sensing the change in energy. His training had kicked in, the years of retirement falling away as he prepared for a mission. Mike knelt beside him, checking the special tactical vest he'd retrieved from his truck, reinforced canine gear from his service days. Just like old times, huh, boy? He murmured, securing the vest around Max's sturdy frame. The shepherd's eyes met his, alert and steady. Ready. Dawson watched the interaction with quiet respect. He remembers his training. He never forgot, Mike said, standing. Neither did I. Darkness blanketed the forest as Mike, Max, and Agent Dawson approached the Brenner warehouse. They had parked Dawson's sedan 2 miles away on an abandoned logging road, continuing on foot to avoid detection. Mike led the way, his knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable as they navigated through the dense undergrowth. Max moved silently beside him, the tactical vest barely visible in the moonlight. The shepherd's training was evident in every careful step, every alert movement of his head as he scanned for threats. Agent Dawson followed closely, his breathing controlled, his movements precise. Position Alpha should be just ahead, Mike whispered, referring to the surveillance point they had identified during their planning, an elevated ridge with clear sightlines to the warehouse's main entrance and loading dock. Good cover, minimal exposure. From their vantage point, the warehouse glowed with activity. The previously abandoned building now buzzed with life. Floodlights illuminated the loading dock, while several vehicles patrolled the perimeter. Mike counted 4 armed guards, their rifles clearly visible even from a distance. This is no timber processing operation, Dawson muttered, adjusting his night vision binoculars. Those are professional security personnel. Military training by the look of their movements. And those aren't hunting rifles. Mike focused his attention on the vehicles. The black SUV and silver pickup from earlier were present, joined now by two unmarked vans with tinted windows. But what caught his eye was the sheriff's cruiser, parked discreetly at the far side of the building. "Carter's here," Mike whispered, pointing it out to Dawson. "Told you he was involved." Dawson nodded, snapping photos with the specialized camera. "This is good. We've got clear documentation of a local official at the scene. Adds weight to our case." For the next hour, they documented everything: guard rotations, vehicle movements, crates being positioned inside the warehouse. Mike noted how efficiently the men worked, with the precision that came from practice and planning. At 11:47 p.m., headlights appeared on the access road. 3 large shipping trucks approached in convoy, their engines growling in the night silence. The guards at the gate waved them through without inspection, directing them toward the loading dock. "This is it," Dawson whispered, his camera clicking rapidly. Exactly the same model trucks linked to the cargo thefts in Sacramento and Portland. "We've got them." Max tensed suddenly, his ears swiveling towards something behind them. A low growl built in his throat, barely audible. "Someone's coming," Mike warned, recognizing Max's alert signal instantly. They pressed themselves lower to the ground, concealed by underbrush and shadows. Mike placed a calming hand on Max's back, the silent command to stay quiet but remain alert. Footsteps approached, accompanied by the snapping of twigs and rustle of leaves. A beam of light swept through the trees, passing just over their hiding spot. Mike recognized the gate immediately. Sheriff Tom Carter, moving through the forest with purpose, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Saw something up here," a voice grumbled. Not Carter's, but someone accompanying him. "Swear I heard movement." "Probably just a deer," Carter replied, though his tone betrayed his unease. "Check it anyway. We can't afford surprises tonight." Dawson signaled to Mike. 3 fingers, then a sweeping motion. 3 minutes to circle around if they needed to retreat. Mike nodded, then froze as the flashlight beam swept perilously close to their position again. The footsteps drew nearer. Max remained perfectly still, years of training overriding his natural instinct to react. Mike could feel the shepherd's muscles tensed beneath his hand, ready to move at the slightest command. Just when discovery seemed inevitable, a radio crackled to life, startling both searchers. "Sheriff, we need you at the main gate. Trucks are ready for inspection." Carter hesitated, his flashlight beam holding steady on a spot just 5 feet from their hiding place. "Roger that. On my way." He turned to his companion. "Check the perimeter one more time, then head back." The footsteps retreated, leaving them in darkness once again. Mike released the breath he'd been holding, giving Max a gentle pat of approval. Dawson tapped Mike's shoulder, pointing toward the warehouse. Below, the operation was shifting into high gear. Men were unloading crates from the trucks with practiced efficiency, while others moved pallets of goods from inside the warehouse onto the emptied vehicles. "Classic turnaround," Dawson whispered. "Offloading stolen cargo, replacing it with different merchandise. Makes the trucks harder to track or connect to specific thefts." Mike focused his binoculars on the activity by the loading dock. In the harsh artificial light, he could now clearly see what was being moved. Electronics in one direction, what looked like pharmaceutical containers in another. The scale of the operation was impressive and disturbing. Sheriff Carter had positioned himself by the main gate, clipboard in hand, apparently checking items off a list as the trucks were loaded. His involvement was undeniable now, his role clearly more than just looking the other way. "I've seen enough," Dawson murmured, securing his camera. "We need to pull back and call in the tactical team. This is a major operation with armed personnel." Mike nodded, but as they prepared to retreat, Max suddenly stiffened, his attention locked on something below. Following the shepherd's gaze, Mike spotted a familiar figure emerging from one of the trucks. The man from the diner who had misidentified Max's breed. "That's him," Mike whispered. "The one I told you about." Dawson zoomed in with his camera. Known associate of the Santiago cartel. Definitely not in the timber business. They began their careful retreat, moving backward through the undergrowth with deliberate precision. Max led the way, his senses alert for any sign of the remaining guard. They had nearly reached their extraction point when a twig snapped loudly under Dawson's boot. The sound seemed to echo through the quiet forest. "What was that?" The guard's voice carried through the trees, followed by the beam of his flashlight sweeping in their direction. "Go, go," Dawson hissed, abandoning stealth for speed. They ran through the forest, branches whipping past them as shouts erupted behind. Max stayed close to Mike's side, moving with surprising agility despite his age and old injury. The crack of a gunshot split the night, a bullet splintering bark inches from Mike's head. Max growled, his protective instincts surging. "No, Max," Mike commanded firmly. "Stay with me." They reached a small ravine, sliding down the embankment to use it as cover. Dawson pulled out his service weapon, face grim in the moonlight. "So much for observation only," he muttered, checking his radio. "Calling for immediate backup, but they're still hours out." Mike's mind raced, evaluating their options. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with a long way to their vehicle and limited cover between. The weight of the situation pressed on him, familiar yet different from his K-9 unit days. Beside him, Max remained focused, awaiting direction. In the shepherd's steady gaze, Mike found his resolve. "We didn't come this far to fail now," he said quietly. "Let's move." The ravine provided temporary cover, but Mike knew it wouldn't last. Flashlight beams swept the forest above them, accompanied by shouts and the crackling of radios. They were being hunted by professionals, men who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate witnesses. "We need to split up," Mike whispered to Dawson. "Double our chances of getting this evidence out." Dawson shook his head. "Bad idea. We stay together." "They'll expect that," Mike countered. "Max and I know these woods better than anyone. We can draw them away, while you circle back to the vehicle with the camera." Dawson hesitated, clearly conflicted between protocol and practicality. Finally, he ejected the memory card from the camera and handed it to Mike, keeping a second card for himself. "Backup copies," he explained. "Neither of us should have all the evidence." Mike nodded, pocketing the card. "Let's synchronize watches. If we're not at the vehicle by 0300, we each make our way out separately." "Agreed," Dawson said. "And Sullivan, no heroics. Your job is to survive and deliver that evidence." The urgency in Dawson's voice reminded Mike that this wasn't just about one corrupt sheriff. This was about dismantling an entire criminal operation. They parted ways at the ravine's edge, Dawson heading east toward the logging road where they'd left the sedan, while Mike and Max moved west. deliberately making enough noise to attract attention. "Come on, boy," Mike whispered, patting Max's side. Just like the old search and evade drills, their strategy worked, perhaps too well. Within minutes, Mike heard multiple sets of footsteps converging on their position. Flashlight beams cut through the trees, ahead and behind. "Sullivan," Sheriff Carter's voice called out. "I know it's you. Make this easy on yourself." Mike remained silent, guiding Max through a dense thicket that concealed their movement. They needed to keep the pursuers focused on them, long enough for Dawson to reach the vehicle, but not so close that they'd be caught. A figure stepped into view 30 yards ahead. One of the armed guards from the warehouse, rifle raised. Mike signaled Max to stay low and still, both of them freezing in the shadows of a fallen tree. The guard advanced cautiously, scanning the forest floor for signs of their passage. Behind him, Mike could hear Sheriff Carter and at least 2 others spreading out in a search pattern. "I don't like this, Sheriff," a voice said nearby, the man from the diner. "If he gets to the feds with what he saw, he won't," Carter answered, his voice harder than Mike had ever heard it. "Sullivan's good, but he's retired for a reason. Find him." Mike's mind raced, evaluating escape routes. The creek bed to the east would provide cover, but slow their progress. The ridge to the north was more exposed, but would give them speed. Every option carried risk. Max made the decision for him. The shepherd's ears suddenly perked up, his attention fixed on something in the darkness ahead. Before Mike could react, Max darted forward, breaking cover. "There!" a guard shouted, swinging his rifle toward the movement. Mike's heart stopped as a shot rang out, the bullet striking a tree where Max had been a split second before. The shepherd zigzagged through the trees with the agility of a much younger dog, drawing the guards away from Mike's position. "Max!" Mike hissed, panic and pride warring in his chest as he watched his partner become the decoy. 2 guards crashed through the underbrush after Max, leaving Sheriff Carter and the man from the diner nearby. Mike seized the moment, circling behind them and heading toward the ravine that would lead back to the logging road. He moved quickly but carefully, wincing at every snapping twig and rustling leaf. The memory card felt heavy in his pocket, a weight of responsibility pressing on him. Max was out there, risking his life to protect Mike and the mission. The thought drove him forward. A sharp whistle pierced the night, their old recall signal. Mike froze, listening intently. In the distance, he heard the distinct sound of Max's bark, followed by shouts of confusion from the guards. "Smart boy," Mike whispered, relief flooding through him. Max had broken away from his pursuers and was now circling back. The old training was holding, their partnership as strong as ever, despite the years and the circumstances. 5 minutes later, Max appeared beside him, panting but unhurt. Mike knelt briefly, checking his partner for injuries and finding none. "Good boy," he murmured, genuine pride in his voice. "Let's finish this." They continued toward the ravine, moving faster now, with the immediate pursuit shaken. The sounds of the search grew distant, suggesting the guards had lost their trail. Then, without warning, Sheriff Carter stepped out from behind a large oak tree, his service weapon aimed directly at Mike's chest. "That's far enough, Sullivan," Carter said quietly. Mike froze, instantly calculating the distance between them. Too far to rush him, too close to miss if he fired. Max growled low beside him, sensing the threat. "Call off your dog," Carter ordered, his aim unwavering. "I don't want to shoot him, but I will." Mike signaled Max to stay, keeping his voice calm, despite the hammering of his heart. "What happened to you, Tom? You were a good cop once." Something flickered in Carter's eyes. Regret, perhaps, or simply annoyance. He'd started small, looking the other way for a fee. Then it got bigger, and by the time I wanted out, they made it clear that wasn't an option. He gestured with the gun. "Empty your pockets. Slowly." Mike complied, removing the memory card and holding it up. "This what you want? Evidence of you working with drug traffickers and thieves?" "It's more complicated than that," Carter snapped. "You don't understand the position I was in." "I understand choice," Mike replied quietly. "Every cop does. We choose which side we're on, every day." Carter's expression hardened. "The card, Sullivan, now." Mike held it out, but as Carter reached for it, Max suddenly barked, not at the sheriff, but at something behind Mike. The distraction was momentary, but enough. Carter's gaze flicked away for a split second, and Mike seized the opportunity, lunging forward. The gun discharged, the bullet whizzing past Mike's shoulder as he tackled Carter to the ground. The two men wrestled for control of the weapon, their struggle desperate and silent, save for their labored breathing. Carter was younger, and his back hadn't been damaged in the line of duty. He began to gain the advantage, forcing the gun's barrel toward Mike's chest. Then Max moved, not with aggression, but with precision. The shepherd clamped his jaws around Carter's wrist, applying just enough pressure to cause pain without breaking skin. The sheriff cried out, his grip on the weapon loosening. Mike seized the gun, rolling away and coming up in a defensive position. Carter lay on the ground, clutching his wrist, his expression a mixture of pain and defeat. "You're under arrest," Mike said, the words coming naturally, despite the years since he'd last spoken them. Carter laughed bitterly. "You don't have that authority anymore, Sullivan. You're just a retired cop with a grudge." "He might not," came Dawson's voice, as the FBI agent stepped into view, his own weapon trained on Carter. "But I do. Sheriff Thomas Carter, you're under arrest for corruption, criminal conspiracy, and attempted murder of a federal witness." Dawn broke over Pinecrest as the FBI tactical team secured the Brenner warehouse. 17 arrests were made, including the senior members of the trafficking operation and 2 of Carter's deputies. The evidence recovered from the scene confirmed links to 3 separate organized crime syndicates. Mike sat on the hood of his truck, watching the activity from a distance. Max lay beside him, exhausted but content, his head resting on Mike's lap. The adrenaline of the night had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and an unexpected sense of peace. Agent Dawson approached, looking as tired as Mike felt. "You did good work tonight, Sullivan. You and your partner both." Mike nodded, his hand resting on Max's head. "He's the real hero. Always has been." "Agent Ramirez wants to speak with you both," Dawson said, a hint of a smile breaking through his professional demeanor. "Seems the Bureau might have a consulting position available for a retired K-9 officer with your particular skills." Mike looked down at Max, considering. The previous night had awakened something in both of them. A sense of purpose, of partnership, that retirement had dulled but never extinguished. What do you think, boy? One more chapter? Max's tail thumped against the truck hood, his eyes bright with the same understanding that had always bound them together. Some things didn't need words, never had. 2 weeks later, Mike stood in the backyard of his cabin, watching Max navigate the new agility course he'd built. Gentler than regulation standards, designed for an aging canine with a lingering injury, but challenging enough to keep his mind sharp. The shepherd moved with renewed energy, his limp less pronounced, his spirit visibly lifted by their new routine. 3 days a week, they worked with the FBI field office in Sacramento, helping train new canine teams and occasionally consulting on cases where their experience proved valuable. The nightmares that had once haunted Mike's sleep came less frequently now, replaced by a deeper, more restful slumber. The weight of the past still visited sometimes, but it no longer defined his days. As Max completed the course, he trotted back to Mike, carrying the training toy they used for rewards. His eyes held the same devotion they always had, but there was something else there now, a renewed sense of purpose, a contentment that mirrored Mike's own. Mike knelt down, taking the toy and replacing it with a treat from his pocket. "Good boy," he said softly, the simple words carrying the weight of years of partnership, of trust earned and given without reservation. Max settled beside him, both of them looking out over the quiet forest beyond the yard. The memories they shared, both difficult and triumphant, had shaped them, bound them together in ways that transcended ordinary understanding. In the end, what had saved them both wasn't just their training or even their instincts. It was the unspoken language between them, built over thousands of hours of working side by side. It was Max's unwavering loyalty and Mike's absolute trust. It was the silent promise they'd made to each other years ago, a promise neither had forgotten, despite retirement and injury and the passage of time. They had always been guardians of the public, of the law, of each other. But perhaps most importantly, they had become guardians of memory, preserving what mattered most when everything else had changed. Max leaned against Mike's leg, a familiar comfort, a constant companion. Tomorrow, they would train again, work again, continue writing this unexpected new chapter, together, as they had always been.